right, it's right on 12:30, so we'll begin the session. Welcome to Zoom and to our joint Stormwater Queensland and Stormwater Victoria webinar. Hope you're safe and going well. I'm Tracy Pham. I'm the chair of the Events Subcommittee for Stormwater Vic. We've also got Brad. There's Brad.
Hey, Tracy, how are you?
Good. And we're going to be your MCs for the event today. This week, we're looking at auditing and maintenance of stormwater assets through Ralph Fidera's eyes and what he's learned over the last 20 years experience with them. We've hit the Zoom capacity for this event today, so that really means that we're excited to see what Ralph has to say. I'd like to start off by acknowledging and paying respects to the various traditional custodians throughout Australia. We have a lot of people joining us from New South Wales as well. So in the spirit of reconciliation, Stormwater Victoria and Stormwater Queensland acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. This session is being recorded, so please let us know if you have any issues with that. If you have any other queries, please send us a private chat message or an email. If you have questions for speakers, please make sure you put them in the Q&A panel, which is located in your Zoom toolbox below. The previous webinars are up on our website, on the SV website, so please check them out if you haven't. So on to webinar format. So Jamie Tainton, who is the Stormwater Victoria President, will be providing her President address next, and we will have a 3-minute chat from our sponsor, Wave Maintenance. I will then formally introduce the other panelists, who are Ralph Fidera, the speaker, and Rob Catchlove, who is the representative for the sponsor. This will be followed by a 30-minute presentation by Ralph, and then 15 minutes of Q&A. We will have formal closing by 1:30, but we'll keep the session live in case there are additional questions to be answered. You can also chat with us using the chat functions below in this time. All right, over to you, Jamie.
Thank you. Welcome everyone to our next great webinar. I'm Jamie Tainton, President Stormwater Victoria, and I'm very excited to report we've reached capacity on this session. It's over 500 people registered. This time, we've partnered with our Queensland counterparts to give you the fantastic insight into WSUD asset maintenance. Queensland and Victoria have a long alliance that extends well beyond Victoria's need to support the Queensland Maroons against the New South Wales Blues in the state of origin. Queensland has long been the destination of Victorians escaping our winter cold. I was often envious of my schoolmates heading to the Gold Coast for the July school holidays time and time again. I often wondered what the Queenslanders thought of this influx. But perhaps we now have our answer. They closed the borders. Too soon? Well, as part of our broader Stormwater Australia network, we actually like to share the love and extend the learning beyond the borders, and with this format, we certainly can. Today, I'm speaking on behalf of both states, and one initiative that we've both signed up to is the Zero Litter to Ocean policy. Along with 9 other councils, 27 private industry groups, and 12 of us not-for-profit types, the policy is gaining ground. Did you know that 8 million tonnes of plastics flow into the ocean? It's like dumping 1 garbage truck into the ocean every minute. Just picture that. At the current rate, by 2030, that rate is going to double to 2 garbage trucks a minute. It's only 9 short years away, people. To put a bit more of a visual image on this problem, and of particular relevance to Southeast Queensland, is research that has indicated that 30% of dead sea turtles in Moreton Bay are full of plastic. It's really just heartbreaking. Now let's tie this back into our closed border crossings and current pandemic. With Australia and globally, as we know, there's unprecedented job loss and economic instability. We need Australian government initiatives that can be implemented immediately to create jobs and boost the Australian economy. Stormwater New South Wales and our state members, Ocean Protect, kicked this litter to ocean policy off and are calling on our governments to establish and work towards a zero to litter ocean target for Australia. Achieving this target would mean that any pollutant larger than 5 millimetres, like a cigarette butt, would be prevented from flowing to the waterways or ocean. So if you want to know more and get involved, head to our zerolittertoocean.com.au to read more and find out how you can help. Now, before we get to hear from Ralph, I'd like to thank Wave Maintenance for sponsoring this event. Without our sponsors, we can't run this webinar for free, and we're forever grateful. We also have a few state-based updates for you. Firstly, Stormwater Queensland continue to work on position papers and industry feedback submissions on a wide range of topics, including rainwater tanks, point source water quality policy and offsets. Of a more national interest, they've been drafting their submission to Stormwater Australia's Squid protocol, having spent many hours preparing feedback and appropriately managing conflicts of interest. These documents are all available on the Stormwater Queensland website underneath their advocacy tab. I'm having trouble talking today. On top of the page. Stormwater Queensland will also run these seminars every 2 weeks. So if you want more information on the timetable and upcoming sessions, jump back into their website for more information, or hang tight and Brad will cover that off at the end of this session. It's also probably a good time to congratulate our National Stormwater Australia President, Alan Hoban, on being awarded the 2020 Queensland Professional of the Year Award by Engineers Australia. Well done, Alan. And lastly, from our Victorians, we have launched our International Keynote Speaker Series for November, and we are very excited to share this news with you. This is completely different to our normal free webinars that will still continue, of course, but we wanted to provide the industry with a more international flavour in lieu of the conference we missed this year, and have instead brought keynotes out into their own event. This is another virtual event, but it will attract a fee to cover the international speakers and help run our association. We'll send out some more information over the coming weeks, but really keen to see you all at this upcoming paid event. But don't worry, we still have our free webinars. In fact, next month we have Celine from WaterTech, who's going to talk about the leadership in stormwater industry and share with us her learnings in the International Water Centre program. She's been part of this year. I can't wait for that either. Now I'll hand over to Rob from our sponsor, from Wave, to give us some background on Wave Maintenance. Rob, are you up?
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. So hi everyone, so good to see everyone out and about. And I just need to get the elephant in the room out of the way, which is, looks like I've run into an axe. It's not related to having my kids at home doing school. It's unfortunately just ran into the back of the car door. So a little dramatic, but I think I'll live, and hopefully there's no further wounds like that that are related to homeschooling. As soon as that border opens, we'll be out of here. So look, thanks for having us. And you know, Stormwater Victoria, Stormwater Queensland, must be said, it's all volunteer based. And Tracy, Jamie, Brad, and a whole lot of other people do heaps of really good work. So got to keep supporting these volunteer industry associations. Look, my 1 or 2 minutes on Wave Maintenance is simply that Ralph, myself, and Derek, who's a registered builder, were having various chats, and 3 years ago decided that we really felt that there was a good opportunity to start a maintenance business. So the crux of what we do is about maintenance of these assets. And our catch cry really is that, you know, good maintenance really means assets last longer, and far longer than they can if they don't. So we think we've probably done over about 1,000 maintenance visits now. We would have rectified, I think, about 50 or so assets in terms of resetting, and maybe audited a few hundred as well. Predominantly Victoria based, looking to you know, put in some bids and start up some work in New South Wales, and hopefully soon after that Queensland. And look, the crux of it is maintenance of these exact assets that Ralph's going to take you through, the small scale water sense urban design assets, you know, the things that make cities really livable. So it's bioretention systems, swales, biofilters, whatever you want to call them, wetlands, and stormwater harvesting assets is another kind of critical thing that we've been working on. So yeah, look, thanks for having us. Really, really big issue, obviously, with so many people that have signed up. And let's get on to the main event. So over to you, Ralph.
All right, Rob, just before we start, I'll introduce Ralph and Rob formally. Thanks again, Jamie and Rob, for that. Ralph Federer is a well-respected leader in the stormwater industry across Australia with over 20 years experience in the industry across public and private enterprise. Ralph is an environmental engineer applying his engineering skills within a landscape, green infrastructure, and open space context. He has been involved in delivering all stages of WSUD assets from policy to design, managing and constructions and maintenance to monitoring and auditing a range of large and small WSUD assets. He runs his own consulting practice as well as being a hands-on director at Wave Maintenance. Also, we just saw Rob Catchlove. Rob Catchlove is the director of Wave Consulting. He is an environmental scientist with 18 years experience in the water sector who has a unique skill set that includes science, engineering, social science, and community engagement. Rob has managed large complex projects over several years, and often at the cutting edge of livability and future cities. He's on the QA panel today, so make sure you ask him a few questions as well. All right, Ralph, time to take it away. Do you want to share your screen? Okay, good. Are you on mute there? Can't seem to hear you.
Sorry.
Okay,
Here we
great.
go.
Thank you.
Gotta have a technical glitch. Thank you for the introduction, Tracy, and Jamie for the words before. So yes, the presentation today, cash for comment, Wave Maintenance. Both Rob and I work there, but it's important to support these events through sponsorship as well. Otherwise, they wouldn't happen. So I might have to skip over a bit of the intro as to who Wave Maintenance is, as we just heard some of that, but I'll give you a bit more context. Then on the contract that we currently have with Stonnington Council, and the contract there and the assets that we're maintaining, and that's the core part of this presentation in terms of what data we've collected, how we found those systems, what's been working, what hasn't. And also branching over into some other rectification sites that we've also done over the last month or two. With the main aim of this presentation that we end up designing and building better systems that are easier to maintain, because therefore then water quality gets improved every time it rains rather than bypassing. Certainly we found that design has improved over the last 10 to 20 years, and also the way we build systems generally is better, although I still run into contractors that are building things for these WSUD systems for the first time, and they really don't get simple basics like water needs to flow downhill. So that we're still grappling with that, but then maintenance is the other thing about how to design and build them so that they are easy to maintain, and we'll go through some of the details as to what that literally means when you're down on your hands and knees trying to clean these systems. So who is Wave Maintenance? So it's Rob and I and Derek. So there's Rob and I in our COVID gear, about to do an audit on a wetland system with our lovely waders. So we, as Rob mentioned, we've been around for a couple of years. We mainly do maintenance, but we also do auditing and training and rectification of these WSUD assets, including ponds, swales and rain gardens. And we've also currently maintaining a couple of stormwater harvesting systems for councils, and we've rectified one or two of those over the years as well. Again, Rob mentioned that we started this a few years ago by having discussions between ourselves and Derek, and really we saw a gap in the market for doing good WSUD asset maintenance. There's very few specialist companies out there that we've seen that have WSUD maintenance as the core to their business. It's the main thing they do. There's quite a number of companies that do it as an add-on to their general landscape and their streetscape maintenance, but it's just one or two people out of 100 that might do it for 1 or 2 days a week. The other problem with the industry, not a problem, but it is something that needs to be acknowledged, that it's generally low paid. It's highly transient. As people build up their skills, they apply them somewhere else where they're better paid. And you know, it's a relatively low skill base needed, but you still need to know exactly what you're trying to achieve with these listed assets in terms of that water does need to come in, that sediment does accumulate, and you need to take it away, otherwise they don't work. And it's more than just having some plants that look good in a garden bed. There is other functions below the ground in terms of the sand that needs to be unclogged. The outlets need to work, and particularly the inlets, as we'll discuss. We do acknowledge that in terms of wetlands and bushland maintenance, which is quite an overlap, there is a good skill base there, but there isn't in that streetscape tree pit and rain garden maintenance. So hence why we created this company. Who do we see as doing WSUD maintenance? So in Melbourne in particular, but from what I've seen and heard in other states, New South Wales and Queensland, it's not too dissimilar. So in Melbourne in particular, a lot of councils do it in-house through their horticultural team, generally through their horticultural team. Or the arrangement is that everything's external contractor, and there'll be one head contractor, either a civil or parks area, and a company like ours or some other might be underneath that head contractor maintaining these systems. That's if they get maintained at all, which is another problem in itself. The big issue is that these assets, as most of you will know, have both civil and drainage, elements and horticulture. And that's not often within the same division within a council or within a contract. So it could be spread anywhere from 2 to 4 different divisions or contract areas, from the plant and the soil being in horticulture, bits and pipes being in that civil drainage area, trees are often separate again if they're in the system, and litter and street cleaning might be another area separate. So it could be quite a number of contracts in areas that are spanned by these WSUD assets. And very few, and in fact we only know of Stonington as being the only one, have a specialist contract that covers WSUD assets. The beauty of that is that you can get specialists like ourselves in who really focus on making these systems work. We look at both the plants and making sure they're healthy and happy, but also making sure the water gets in, that the filter media is not clogged, that the inlets are open, that the outlets are functioning as they should, that water's getting through the sand, through to the bottom. So we're looking at all those elements as part of the maintenance system and doing both civil and horticulture at the same time. In terms of looking at the particular of Stonington, for those of you who don't know where Stonington is, it's an inner Melbourne council, just borders the Botanic Gardens on the west and all the way up to Chadstone on the east, Yarra and Gardners Creek on the north, and the Princess Highway on the south, suburbs of Toorak, Baran, Malvern, those sort of areas. As mentioned, the assets within Stonington is between the 5 and 15 year mark. They've got 160 individual assets spread across the municipality, as you can see on the map there, from tiny systems of the tree pits in Glenferrie Road to slightly larger systems. About 50 rain gardens across 15 different sites and 106 tree pits across 3 sites. I've got to say that 90 of those, a bit more than 90 of those tree pits are all in Glenferrie Road, and you'll see why there's so many. They're the tiny ones. They're the quarter of a square metre size system. So these are the examples of the tree pits. Glenferrie is in the middle, Eva and Henry. And this is the state we took them over in, or as part of our audit for our the submission that we did. We took photos prior to us winning the contract, and these are some of those photos. And same with the rain gardens, which is an example of what the rain gardens, some of the 50 or so rain gardens that in Stonington, and the state of them as we took them over. The contract in itself, for those that are interested, and I have had questions as to how we arrange these contracts, how people arrange these contracts and what's in them. In the Stonington one, there's a quarterly maintenance for all the rain garden assets and the tree pits, involving weeding and In particular here it's hand weeding, no herbicide to be used, which has an interesting side benefit of that when you're hand weeding a plant, you're pulling it up by the roots and taking a clump of sediment with you. So you're kind of de-sedimenting the system at the same time, which is kind of good. Where if you're just using herbicide, that sediment and root mass stays there. And you get by-kill of beneficial plants as well, whereas hand weeding, there's a risk of pulling out some germinants, but you're not killing large plants by hand weeding. Remove any dead plants, remove leaf litter and anthropogenic litter, clear the inlets and outlets, and monitor for other things like the mulch and the filter layer still working, report any physical damage, cars running over and pits being blocked, that sort of stuff. Additionally, every month the tree pits get cleaned, and that's mainly based around Glenferrie Road, being conscious of litter and the visual element of that. Weeding in the spring months for the rain gardens is an additional, and leaf litter in the autumn for the rain gardens, because the tree pits are already getting maintained every month. I must say the leaf litter in autumn and in April seems a bit early. Most times the leaf litter is fairly evenly spread over the year, but it seems to be more in May or June, probably because of our longer summers and it's not getting cold enough for the leaf drop to happen in April. Pruning and sediments a bit extra in, or sediment forebay clean out in June. Again, we clean out the sediment every time we go there just to make sure the systems work. So there's not actually that much extra that happens in June, but it could be it is a good consideration to have in there. Every time we go, we take a record, and I'll talk to that in a moment, and we take photos to show what we've been doing, and in particular if there's an issue with the system, so we can visually show council what we mean by the curbs broken or a barrier's damaged or something else. As part of their contract, there are reactive components around plants, filter and mulch, watering that council can request. That hasn't happened except for we did a review with council. We did a couple of months and then sat down with council and discussed what we saw, and actually gave them a list of rectification actions that we thought were necessary. And to their credit, they had some dollars that they could spend on it, and it got to a point where it actually got quite a large contract. So they RFQ'd it, and we were lucky enough to win it, that contract. So that reactive component hasn't been used except for the rectifications happened, but they spent $30,000 worth of on that rectification, so it was a separate contract in itself. We started the contract back in 2019. The year prior to that, we went for it and lost on price. In preparation for both these contracts, we thought it was good due diligence to have a look at the systems and give them a mini audit, so to speak, just to see what we're getting in for. And both times we noticed that the sediment levels were quite high and the inlets were blocked, so they weren't really treating water. And I'll talk to that as being the main issue that I see with these systems, and any rain garden system or tree pit that we audit, that sediment blocking inlets is generally the #1 issue that stops them from working. So we awarded their contract back in May 2019, and we're doing the contract for more than 12 months now. It's been extended to October 2020, and then it'll go out to market again, and hopefully we'll win it for another 12 months or so. When we started, given that the high levels of sediment accumulation in the inlets being blocked on pretty much all the systems, we spent some extra time in May and June to unblock those and to get the water flowing back into the systems, make them work as WSUD systems, without doing a total reset, because that was beyond scope and budget. And also you'll see that compromising between doing that and the existing vegetation. I'll talk to that over the next couple of slides. Oops. So these are the states of the systems as we took them over. In Glenferrie Road, it's a bit hard to tell here, but there's quite a lot of sediment just behind the inlet here. The the idea of these bars, and a lot of tree pits have arranged them like this, is to keep a bit more of this litter out so that the street sweeper can collect it. What I'm tending to see and find is that, yes, that works, keeping it front clean, but what the brushes rotate in that sort of clockwise fashion, they actually flick material in, both litter and sediment, and very quickly there's accumulation of material just behind this entry point, which you don't see until you get down and have a close look, and then water can't get in. It's sort of a 10 mil barrier can stop water from flowing in. The flow from the gutter to the tree is fairly minimal, so it doesn't take much to get those blocked. So having obstructions in the front, I think is great. Similarly with rain gardens, in terms of street sweepers cleaning the gutter, but then flicking stuff into that inlet area, it needs to be regularly maintained. Otherwise, you get this high accumulation. These photos are fairly small, but there is at least a 10 centimetre accumulation of sediment and mulch here. Lots of sand and material in front of this rain garden, and same here in this inlet area. This one, again, it's hard to tell by the picture, but this gutter stone is sort of 10, 15 centimetres high, and the soil behind it is at the same level. So water's running into this area and then jumping over to the footpath, running on the footpath before it's getting into the rain garden here. Here are a couple of examples of what we did in that first month in terms of cleaning out those inlet areas. These vegetation's looking quite healthy. It's growing really well in the sediment and the organic matter that's composted and accumulated on top of the rain gardens. So we dug a trench as much as we could to get water in without compromising the vegetation around the sides, but allowing water to get in. And this is the area we clean now. Same with this system here, where upstream of here, there's that same mulch material, that rock mulch on quite a slope. Tends to run into the gutter virtually every rain event, and over the 3 months it accumulates to this level and needs to be removed, as we've done here, to allow a bit of that water in. This system here has undergone some rectification, so we'll see it again in some later slides. As I mentioned, every time we're collecting data as part of the contract. That's a requirement. What we proposed to council, as part of that contract, they had a form of various bits of data that they want to collect it. And rather than just tick boxing that form, we said to them, well, why don't we try this Google form arrangement? And actually, Rob came up with this. So on the spot, we can click that it's City of Stonington as the client, the date, the time, who did it, and then the other bits of data around. We looked at the filter, the media, we did litter collection, we did sediment collection, how much of those did we take out, what is our thoughts in terms of rating of the vegetation, the inlets, the outlets, etc. So all that's done on the spot while we're there looking at the system. We can also link photos to that system, and in the background, every time we say submit, the data gets collected in a spreadsheet and it's there. And later on, just to make it a bit easier to see, rather than a big spreadsheet, after a few months, you've got lots and lots of data there. Each month, we actually break it up into a single spreadsheet and send that to council, and they keep that at their end. From discussions with council, they're finding that a good, simple, easy, straightforward way of visualising the data, and they're able to store it, rather than having hard copies that they might scan in and have as a PDF somewhere. I guess it also at their end gives them an ability to analyse the data if they wish. What we've talked with Stonington and another council we're working with, Van Newell, about is perhaps the ability to link this data that we're collecting in this method up to their asset management database. And it might mean that we don't use Google Forms in the future, but that online platform is a really good way of doing that. As I said, you're on the spot, the data and the information is fresh. You're just clicking a few boxes, putting in some numbers in terms of the volumes that you've created. We found a couple of times when we've been really busy or whatever, we're not doing it on site, we're going back home and then entering the data. You very quickly not totally forget, but you have to go, oh, I have to go check that photo again. What did I do? Oh yeah, that's right, we did that much and this much. Doing it on the spot is a much easier method of doing it. And this digital way is great. So as part of that data, this is some of the data that we've collected in terms of the volumes of litter and sediment per month. The quarterly visits happen in June, September, January and March. So they're usually the big month in terms of the graph. You can see when we first took over the contract, a lot of sediment was coming out, or 2.5 tonnes, and then that gradually declined. March, for some reason, was quite low. I think that might be a little bit of a data error because back September again, it's more than hundreds of kilos that we take out in those quarterly visits. The small numbers in between is when we do the tree pits only, and a lot of that sediment and litter is coming out in Queen Ferry Road. So every month, as you can see, there's still a reasonable amount that we pull out each month in those visits in those tree pits. The huge number here in June is related to the rectifications, where we took 4-6 skip bins worth, 6 cubic metre skip bin worth full of sediment off to the tip. And that's that huge volume there. And now a lot of those systems are looking much, much better, much less sediment within them. And I think that will reflect over September and then into January, March next year, some lower numbers coming out in terms of litter and sediment, because we're not taking out material that was accumulated years ago, but it'll be the numbers will be interesting because it'll be more that annual load that we're removing rather than any sort of previous accumulated sediment within these systems. So those numbers will be interesting, I think. Now I'll jump to looking more in detail at both the tree pits and the design, some of the pros and cons and the nuances of a tree pit, and same with the rain garden. Principally focusing again on the Stonington systems, but also branching out to other systems that we've seen that we don't actually maintain, but look like they're easier to maintain into the way they've been designed and built. So what we're looking at here is in Glen Ferry Road. You've probably seen a few versions of the Glen Ferry Road tree pit by now through this presentation. This one is the easiest to clean and the ones that were built last. So over the progression, they went from quite a pervious top that could see through and you could see the litter around the base of the tree to a more solid opening, but still can be lifted up. Most of them don't have this flap behind the inlet where you can lift it up and get access immediately behind where most of the sediment and litter is accumulating. So this was a great add-on that makes maintaining these systems much, much easier. In the other systems where this is a solid paver, you're left with scraping material through the front with your fingers, or I'll just quickly scroll up to here where we've got this little gadget where we basically shove the material back through to the tree and dig it out from around the tree. The only downside is when they installed these, they didn't leave quite enough tolerance on some of them where the flap is actually very, very stiff, and some of them we can't move. So having a bit more space when they get installed through the gaps around the edge, or not pressing the concrete around as it dries and expands, it really clamps that metal, which has a little bit of give. The other two systems have quite heavy grates on them, and we see this a lot when we've ordered other systems where we're conscious of the load of traffic near the trees in terms of being able to take a truck across them. I would argue that you don't want a truck this close to a tree, so having this bit of grading here is actually the gutters here, the tree, and then there's the road, so a truck shouldn't be able to get in here. These are cast iron, so they're very heavy to lift up. These ones are a bit easier. They do have lockdown lugs, which again just get in the way really. They're a bit heavy to lift, so it's a bit of a challenge. And the lugs are useless, so I wouldn't even bother be using. We don't use the lugs to clamp them down. Anything like that just makes this a two-person lift, so that again adds time and OH&S issues, and just having to lift these up every time and put them back adds a good 10 to 30 seconds each time. Doesn't sound like much, but it does put that little bit of a hindrance there in terms of cleanability and people wanting to lift this up and take the material underneath. And I'll show you the consequence of not cleaning it out. You'll see there's not a lot of extended tension here, and there's a slide later to prove that point in terms of when they originally built, there was that extended tension. And here's another one that has the bars across the front, and very quickly there's material accumulates around here. And the other point being that there's a lot of bars around here that makes it challenging to get to that area underneath the tree and underneath this grate. Yes, they're removable, but there's little screws that remove that. Again, that's another minute or two to undo that. You lose a screw here and there, then you can't put it back together, the screws break, all those sort of things. So less obstruction means easier to clean. In terms of the cleaning issues, it is getting down on your hands and knees, getting down on your belly to reach in. So that's one OH&S issue. We have found that we thought we might need to do this when traffic on the road is less. I found personally it's actually counterintuitive where parked cars actually protect you. You just got to check that there's no driver in the seat every time you kneel down. But they actually provide a bit of protection as long as they're not parked straight in front and the wheels blocking this entryway. Whereas if it's a clear way, and it is on one side at 7 a.m., you've constantly got to look behind you because you do need to get basically in front of these grills to, as I said, pull the material this way or shove it further in. So that's certainly a consideration. When there's a flap here, it's a little bit easier to do it from the footpath side. And I talked about the heaviness of these grates, having to lift them up to get the material that's gotten through the gaps and accumulated around the base of the tree. Here's what I was talking about before. When you don't remove this every regularly, at least every quarter or annually, this material here is you'll see it's sort of a whiter material underneath here. That's the clean sand underneath the accumulated sediment and the composted leaf litter that's on top. And you'll see a bit of a depth here. It's a good 150 to 200 down from the top. So when it was first built, there was that extended detention. Over the years, that material hasn't been removed. So the trees, being opportunist or just the way they grow really, are very happy in this fine, rich material. Get a lot of feeder roots and watering roots into this material, and then it becomes impossible to remove this material. One, because it's too hard to dig into because of the roots, but two, you're going to hugely compromise the tree health by taking this material away and probably kill the tree. So very quickly it turns into, this is now primarily a tree asset that gets passively watered rather than capturing a lot of water and sediment. We still can scrape 2 to 5 centimeters away from the top here, but not all this ponding area. So we've really lost that ponding area, and water will bypass across the top as soon as this fills with water. What are the common litters that we're finding? Leaf litter is one of the main things that we're picking up all the time. Some sediment as well, but leaf litter is quite the load, probably more from a volume perspective rather than weight. The other interesting elements are, there are some, just rubbishy bits that we pick up. But again, in Glenferrie Road, leaf litter is a fair bit of the material that's in the front. The real interesting thing is hair. You see some fuzzy bits in this photo and here as well. Hair seems to be, particularly in Glenferrie Road, something that we pick out a lot. And I find my theory around the hair is also that it binds with the leaf litter and the sediment to create this nice barrier across the top, sort of a felting effect, and gets caught around these bars that go down. So being a busy shopping strip, lots of people, we lose hair all the time. That's my theory as to where it comes from. And we find it because we're cleaning it out more regularly, and I find it probably adds to the issue of that barrier being caused here and getting caught around these bars, these vertical bars. Some better designs that I've seen around the place. My favourite is in Smith Street, Collingwood, where we have a nice open entry. The downside is it'll catch a lot of litter and sediment, but if you're doing WSUD, that's what you're trying to do, I imagine. So having a nice big opening. They've got one bar in the middle in terms of being able to deal with a truck being able to drive over the curb, but generally it's open. You can see it's not maintained that well because it's got a bit of accumulation, but that wouldn't be hard to clean. They're using the terra firma type lids, which are quite light. So in terms of lifting this lid and getting into this area, it's pretty easy. It's a quite nice open guard in terms of having to get to that area. So getting your hands in and around is not going to be hard. This one in Oakley by City of Monash also has a nice big opening. Again, not maintained, but the material is allowed to get in. The heavy pit leads here and here are a bit more challenging. You probably need a Gatic lifter to move them, but easy access, relatively easy access once you move the pit lid. And this one, I declare, I used to work at City of Melbourne. I have like this design where there's a shallow pit in the gutter where sediment and leaf litter can accumulate. Move this, lift this lid and scoop that out with a shovel. Lift these pit lids and take the material out of here. The only downside is there's relatively small gaps under the bluestone curbstone through here, but not a bad design. But I do love the open design of this tree pit. If it's maintained well, it should function well and take a heap of material out of there all the time. Two other approaches that I've seen more recently. This is a catch pit designed by SVC in conjunction with Monash Council. Ari has been working with them to come up with this design. Excuse me, these are used for infiltration systems, so you can have a stratovolt, a city green type system, or a trench, gravel trench, or anything like that, where water is able to spread under the footpath or under the road and get to the trees, or the tree roots find that system. What you need is to keep the sediment and the litter out of there. So these pits have been developed over a number of years to try to achieve that. So water gets in through these coarser 5mm holes, ends up in this pit where the more coarse material gets collected. Then before it goes out to the drain to the infiltration system, there's this basket where it has, again, a 5mm and then a 1 to 2mm screen, and where you're catching the finer material. So these are new, these have only been installed last year, so we need to see how they function. But it's trying to tick those elements of having maybe only an annual clean for these systems, allowing the bigger material to get in and caught in the pit, and then you're really just letting the water and any really fine clay material to get through to the infiltration system. So we'll see how this goes, but I like the idea behind this concept.
Ralph, 2 minutes.
10?
2.
2. I better hurry up then. The other one is one I talked about at the last conference seminar last year, but I'll skip ahead. Rain garden examples at Stonington. They use rosemary, which goes really well over summer, but it has grown over some of the areas. But we had to clear some of this out in terms of rectification. The other thing we've really noticed is Lomandra, Dianella and Diaetes is growing well in most systems, whereas other plants have died away because of the drier summers we have. Talking about inlets, in rain gardens, one of the big bugbears is having these rock inlets and them being too high. So water bypasses here through this gap in the curb, or here it has to get past this narrow gap because these rock inlets have been built too high and even a couple of mil, but these are more like 2 or 3 centimetres to 5 centimetres to high water, can't flow uphill. Some of the cleaning issues, we've got mulch that's a bit too high, sediment at the inlet, and these rock riffles. This is the worst one, where we pretty much have to lift the rocks and dig them out by not even with shovel, but with our fingers, getting the sediment through these rock areas. And you'll see there the outlet is right across the inlet. There is another inlet at the other area, but we rectify that by raising the outlet to make this system work a bit better. These are some of the rectification. You'll see in all these we've put a sediment pit in. This is that one that gets that sediment all the time. Over the this is in September, so from June to September this pit filled up. So we dug out sort of 200 kilos of sediment out of here, and it already got to the point where it's starting to fly over the top already. This is one of those rain gardens that was full of rosemary, and we took some of the rosemary out from the filter area to allow more water to get in. And the rosemary drops a lot of nettles that do have to be removed as well and accumulate over time. And this is again in September where we're digging out the sediment out of each one of these pits. So even over that 3-month period, most of them were half full of sediment and leaf litter. Couple of inlet options that I like. This is in Banyule. This is a bit easier, even though it's rock. It's level rock. It's smooth rock, so it's easier to sweep and scoop the material off. This is the same rain garden out at Montmorency train station, but at the other end where it's complete opposite. You've got these huge boulders that we had to pull out by hand and dig out the sediment in amongst these gaps. This took maybe 2 minutes to clean. This took an hour or two. Quite a difference. Here are some other ones. Again, this took a couple of hours for 2 guys to clean sediment. There is an upstream pit to catch the sediment, but it wasn't cleaned as regularly as it needed to be, so it ran over the top. And some design issues or execution issues. We've got the pit here, but you've got this 5 mil gap where sediment can run past. And here, obviously, the bluestones were placed a bit higher to create that slowing down effect of the water, but as soon as this fills up with sediment and leaf litter, it's backing up and creating a weir. So they pulled those out and let the water run through. 2 others here, we sort of, you notice here there's the lomandra that's missing here, grew really well and basically blocked up the inlet, so that had to be removed. And these grates work okay as long as they're cleaned very regularly, because as soon as they clog up, this area fills and then spills over the top or back to the outlet. And another slight execution issue where this pit, good idea, but sort of placed 2 centimetres too high and water runs around rather than through and into the rain garden. So in terms of the design, I think we're getting a lot more right, but the execution, we still need to be very careful with levels, and the tiniest difference means that water's not getting where it's supposed to. So in summary, leaf and sediment are the main pollutants, and they block inlets really quickly and need to be removed regularly. Sediment traps at inlets make it easier to clean. Shallow pits are best, or flat concrete forebays, not rock riffles. They're a nightmare to clean. Something that I probably haven't mentioned is rock mulch. We use that a lot, but sediment gets in the gaps of the rock mulch. Once the sediment's accumulated, this rock mulch has to be removed with the sediment to unclog the system. So you're turning something that might have been 1 mil into 10 mil into 40 mil and quadrupling the volumes of material that needs to be taken to landfill. That material can potentially be recycled where we screen out the rock mulch from the sediment, but it's a lot of extra work in terms of taking material off site. As I mentioned, tree pits should have nice clear openings and easy to lift lids to make them easy to clean out. And I do acknowledge through the audits that we've done that, and various systems I've seen over the years, generally weeds are managed well, and litter as well, but sediment is the thing that's not being managed on any system that we've audited particularly well. And you've got to say, whether it's intentional or not, a clogged inlet means it's easier to maintain because there's less litter and sediment getting in, so there's less material that you need to be taken out. So it's extra work and is almost a disincentive from the maintenance people to clean the inlets, but it needs to be done for them to work like a WSUD system rather than turning into an ordinary garden bed that has nice looking plants. So that's it for me. Very happy to take questions. If you don't get your question answered today or want to discuss stuff offline, here's some my contact details. We have a website with a bit of information. Feel free to get in contact.
Thanks for that. Yeah, thanks for that, Ralph. We've got a lot of questions for you. So I think Brad's gonna.
Yeah, thanks, Ralph. Thanks, Tracy. Yeah, look, obviously we've got a lot of people in attendance, over 330 at the last count, and Ralph's done a wonderful job of giving a great overview of all the issues that's been identified and solutions as part of his experiences. But yeah, we've got a lot of questions. We are running a bit behind schedule. So Tracy, just let me know when you want to do the official close. But as I think maybe Tracy might have mentioned, we are going to try and run through all, if not the majority of the questions, even after the official closing of this webinar. But like Ralph indicated, if you didn't get your question answered or you'd like to talk to Ralph separately, feel free to contact Ralph directly. But as I think was indicated at the start, if you do have any questions that you would like to ask Ralph, please put them in the Q&A. But I'm going to actually try and run through, I guess, the first ones first, essentially. So I think Sam Phillips was very patient, got a question in very early at the start, and this is a question for Ralph. So Ralph, what was council's key driver for the WSUD asset maintenance contract? How do they reconcile spending the money on maintenance? So what was that, I guess, their motivation to do the maintenance in the first place?
I'll answer this briefly. Maybe Rob's got other insights into council as well. Stunning Council is one of those councils that for good 15, 20 years had a WSUD officer. So they've got an internal champion that got these systems built and recognised that, well, beyond building, we need to maintain them as well. So as well as myself having worked at City Melbourne for a good 10 years, it's quite a, it's one thing to get the strategy up, another to get money to build these things, but it's certainly the hardest element is to get money to maintain them. So I think Stonington eventually got that budget put away, and the driver is to make sure that these systems are working, achieving the water quality outcome that their strategy says they should be doing. So beyond building them, and then your music model says, oh, you should be removing 2 tons of nitrogen every year. That's only true if they're maintained and they work as per designed. I think that's where they're coming from, but it's probably something for council to answer more directly. Rob, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you've covered it. I mean, you got lots of questions, so yeah, Brad, back to you.
Thanks guys, thanks. So there's another question about just sediment contamination. So obviously you're removing a lot of sediment from these rain gardens and tree pits. Is there any analysis of the sediment, such as analysing for contamination or even particle size distribution?
Not particle size, but it is very fine material, silty, slushy, muddy. So it's often fine, but there is, in some systems, depends on the catchment, there is sand and more mulch material. In terms of contamination, we don't. It doesn't go in the green waste, it goes into the normal waste stream at the transfer station. The couple of tests we have done, it hasn't triggered at this volume in terms of contamination. At a sediment basin level, it does, and it's Cat C. But at this really low volume, it generally isn't. Having said that, we do take it to, when we did the rectification, there's a site in Epping in Melbourne that takes this material, takes streetscape sweepings as well as street sweeper material, and then they sort it out and they take Class C material and sort it out into the various, they sift out sand that they reuse, any larger materials, and then the contaminated waste. I'm not sure how they deal with it, but there is a facility that is able to do that. We don't do that with the Stonington volume, but when it gets larger with the rectifications and the sediment basin cleanouts, we do try to take it there. It's more expensive, but at least they're utilising some of that material that's still good within what we're digging out.
There's been a couple of questions around the quality of vegetation growth and vitality. So have you noticed any differences between vegetation growth in various system types? So are rock mulched rain gardens having better vegetation growth than non-mulched, or are you seeing better growth in tree pit systems relative to the rain garden sort of designs? Are you seeing any difference in the quality of the vegetation growth?
Again, Rob, maybe I'll throw this to you because I personally haven't seen it, the real difference between the two systems. The rosemary in Stonington grows really well. And as I said, look, the more hardy ones that can deal with moist feet, but can deal with the dryness like Lomandra, Dianella, and Dietes seem to grow quite well in these systems. What's your thoughts, Rob?
Yeah, interesting that rosemary is pretty hardy and grows really well. Doesn't seem to get isn't that affected. I think reflecting in terms of what Ralph's presented here is that I guess what we're finding is that there's almost like with this focus on the inlets and the sediment is that it's like you end up with a binary rain garden. It's either working or it's not. So we're finding so many instances that rather than all the subtleties that we kind of tend to focus on in terms of, you know, is it a 100 mil extended detention or 150 and this type of plants versus that one, and should it be 1% of the catchment or 1.2%, those kind of different things, they're all blown out of the window because the specifics of the inlet. And so suddenly we're either, you know, through street sweeping or all sorts of other mechanisms, just getting systems that are completely hammered or blocked. And as soon as there's no water going in, then any type of vegetation starts to struggle. So on the whole, I'd say that the vegetation surprised me in terms of its resilience. So where we've got water flowing in, then surprise, surprise, you know, vegetation is going to be okay.
Yeah, very interesting. There's been a couple of questions around weeding. One of the options was steam weeding. Is that something you guys have considered in your maintenance activities?
I live out on a farm, and I've considered steam weeding as an alternative here because we try not to use, or we don't use herbicide, but weeds are definitely an issue. I found it hard to get a hold of a steam weeding machine to be able to test it. As for our maintenance operations, we haven't yet. I'd like to. I don't think we need it for Stonington. It's not onerous to do the hand weeding. In some of the systems you saw with quite bare vegetation, it's a bit more challenging, where basically anything will grow is a weed because you haven't got two good plants there. But it's manageable. And as I said, the interesting side benefit is when you're hand weeding, you're pulling out the roots, and generally it's growing within that sediment layer that you want to take out anyway. So you've got that double whammy of taking the weed away, but also desilting the system. So it's not as onerous as it seems, but we are open to other suggestions, particularly for bigger systems.
Yeah, and just topic on obviously the maintenance activities that you guys have focused on to date have focused on the surface elements of the rain gardens. But what about underneath, like the under drainage? Have you got a feel for how often sort of those elements are compromised or needing significant rectification? So I guess how often are you thinking that the device might need a major rectification as opposed to a sort of surface treatment maintenance intervention?
We have, so through the maintenance, but also more importantly, or more specifically through some of the audits that we've done, generally the under drains are quite well protected, and unless there's some sort of compromise, as you say, through the whole system, or more importantly through the inspection openings with people intentionally opening up the caps and putting in rocks or sand or litter. Generally they seem to work. We found one that had a bunch of sand in it, but actually it seems like it maybe more the sand somehow got into the overflow pit and then was pushed back up the under drain for a short period, because when we flushed it, it came out, and the system was actually working quite fine. So I thought it might have been the way it was built that sand has gotten in, but didn't seem to be the case.
Mm. One question that actually I had as well, that someone, I think Norsheen has asked as well, and we don't want to give away your commercial secrets here, Rob or Ralph, but how much does it cost to maintain a bioretention system? Like I think I've seen Melbourne Waterside about $5 a square metre per year. Have you guys got a feel for how much it costs to maintain a rain garden and a tree pit?
Yes, so having met with you a few months ago and you mentioned that number, Brad, I think you mentioned 15 at the time. We did crunch our numbers and we're lower than that, but higher than 5 a square metre. So it's in that sort of, I don't know, 10, I think. One thing that Rob asked me to mention I haven't is that in this renewal process where we've got the contract till October, but in the next month or two, the contract will go out again. We're looking like we can do it more efficiently than last time. So last time we were sort of in the mid 30,000. We can probably do it for less than that this time around. One, because we've rectified the system. Two, because we understand the system's a lot better and what time it takes. But yeah, that's sort of the ballpark numbers we're looking at, and that's a labour-intensive sort of rate. I know there's a question around vacuuming inlets and stuff. I've definitely thought about that as a good alternative or another way of doing it. The challenges, I suppose, is buying equipment, which will be a couple of grand, having a car that can get close enough all the time to all these tree pits, emptying the system, declogging it, if it gets, some larger bit of litter gets caught in the hose. Add all those up and maybe getting down on your hands and knees every month isn't actually as time consuming as mucking around with something more high tech.
Yeah, there's been actually quite a few. Sorry, yeah, Tracy. Yep.
Sorry, I've got to close the formal part of the webinar because it's 1:30 and people might have meetings or whatever. But we will answer the rest of the questions after the formal closing. So this can, just closing remarks, that this concludes the formal part of the webinar. Please check out the upcoming events that we have in the stormwater industry. All these events are virtual based, so feel free to check out what other states have been up to or are getting up to. In Victoria, we have the next webinar, which is on the 22nd of October. It's about 4 key leadership takeaway messages, and it's run by Celine Machinet. We also have in November our month-long international keynote showcase, where we've gathered the greatest minds from various cities around the world, and we try to see what we can learn from them. Registrations for that are open, so please check that out on our website. Brad, what's going on in Queensland?
Oh, it's all happening, Tracy.
All right.
No, we've got a couple of webinars coming up. One on the 1st of October with Dr. Mark Bailey from AWC on nitrogen removal in our agricultural areas. We're hoping to do a rainwater tank webinar by Dan Niven, and there's another one end of October by Dr. Rodney Reynolds about, and I think it's called "We Should Stop Putting Detention in Stupid Places." So that'll be a cracker, I'm sure. Yeah,
that sounds really interesting. I'll try to check those out as well. As always, please fill out the survey at the end of the webinar once you've closed it. Once you've left, sorry. Please let us know what you think and what we can improve on, and suggest some future topics you'd like to see. This week's speakers' gifts are donations to WaterAid Australia. That goes towards clean water and facilities to communities that don't have them. Thanks again to Contessa and Gems for putting this all together. And thank you for joining us. So let's stick around for the Q&A, because I know there's a lot of questions there that we still have to answer. But if you can't stick around, then we'll see you next time.
Cool.
All right, I'm gonna keep going with those questions.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, there is a few, and look, some of them are a little bit similar, so I'll try to group them if I can, and hopefully I won't ignore or skip over any, but there's been quite a few questions around the actual water quality or hydrologic performance of these assets, whether we actually know whether they're working, I guess, and whether we have a feel for whether the maintenance is actually assisting their performance. So obviously your contract's focusing on the maintenance. That's probably a bit of a stretch to ask you to do performance monitoring on these systems, but just a quick question: is there any performance monitoring undertaken on any of these rain garden or tree pit systems?
So no, not in the sense that we get out with a proper infiltration test and do that. But again, interesting comparing an audit contract, which is probably at the same value for the same amount of systems as a maintenance contract might be. In an audit, you'd see a one-off, you visit the system and get a one-off snapshot of the system. You might do an infiltration test, come up with some ideas as to why it's working or not. With a maintenance contract, you go in there at least 4 times, if not more, a year, and you see the system working in different rain events, different contexts, what's happening over the year. So you actually get a much better understanding of how the system works. In terms of the hydraulic functionality, you can see that pretty quickly when it rains. Is the water getting in? One of those systems in Chapel Street is there when it rained, and it looks like an okay system. It doesn't have many plants, but observing it when it rains, the water runs straight in over the top of the media, straight to the outlet, not one bit of infiltration. And when we looked at the sand a bit closer, it's actually quite a dense sand that's not a filter media. So wouldn't have really picked that up without seeing it on rain, but also we picked that up without doing an infiltration test. And an infiltration test confirmed that the conductivity was really poor. So basically observation and having a skilled operator knowing what they're looking at, I suppose, is also what it comes down to, that they understand. It's supposed to let water soak in and looking at for those hydrological clues as you're doing the maintenance.
There's been a couple of questions around mulch, and one thing I think that's present in the States, I think most bioretention systems in the States have like a sacrificial mulch layer on the surface of the filter media, which can be removed in a maintenance intervention and subsequently protect the filter media, and that mulch is then replaced again. What are your thoughts on having essentially a sacrificial mulch layer to appropriately protect the filter media, and for that mulch layer to be removed and replaced at reasonably frequent intervals, say once every year or two?
So I imagine you're talking about an organic mulch.
Yeah, it could be organic, or there's been quite a few queries around the rock mulch as well.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess if it's rock mulch, you have to have a system where you can separate the rock and make it reusable rather than having to dump it. And organic, and I suppose if a contamination, you'd want to be careful about the contamination level, but I'm thinking if it's replaced annually, you probably at a level where it's not going to be harmful, and it can go into some sort of green waste composting type system. So it sounds like a good idea to me. Yeah,
and given that the sediment, it will otherwise blind the system, like you said, and essentially make it non-functional, just that relatively low cost of that mulch sacrificial layer, if it's organic and can be reused, that for me seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah, otherwise you do no mulch at all. The downside, I guess, in Victoria with our dry summers and in other states in terms of that dry season is that thought around keeping some of that moisture in. Having that wicking element at the bottom probably makes up for that, and having another theory is having a much denser planting out and keeping that high density so that there's shade through the plants rather than having a mulch layer. Therefore, you can pretty much scrape the sediment off the top of the sand.
There was a few queries initially on your hair comment. I've never heard that in all the stormwater presentations I've heard as with hair being a major pollutant. So I dare to say how much of a prescribed contaminant is in my buffet. So the question is, where's that hair coming from? You mentioned some just the passerbys, but I think one of the comments was maybe it's from dog hair or maybe it's possums. Do you have a feel for where the hair is coming from?
Well, Glenferrie Road's a busy shopping strip, so there's thousands of people walking up that strip, getting in and out of cars. So it seems longer than pet hair. So I'd say it's more human orientated, and I've never thought or heard about it either. But again, don't know these things until you're scratching around in front of a tree pit every month and doing 90 of them. So it's not that everyone is as much as those pictures show, but it's not as uncommon as I thought it might have been.
Yeah.
Certainly quite common in that scenario where you've got lots of people. In those residential streets, one of them's in front of the school, we don't notice it. I've just noticed it in Glenferrie Road mainly.
Yeah. And just a comment, a question, if in greenfield sites, would you recommend non-deciduous trees to spread the shedding of leaf matter rather than having a seasonal dropping?
Yeah, well, that's the opposite side of the coin, I suppose, with Australian trees or non-deciduous, is that you'll have that leaf litter a little bit all year. Having said that, most of our systems, we have leaves all year, so as well, even in the deciduous, it's just more so in that autumn period or early winter period. Certainly having plane trees anywhere near this system is the big nuisance, because they've got big fat leaves that don't break down and they have a big impact.
Mm. I think you might have touched on this before, but just to clarify, how toxic is actually the sediment that you're actually pulling out of these devices, and what sort of facility does it need to be disposed to?
Look, again, we don't do regular tests, and where it ends up is just the general landfill, to be honest. So I don't think the toxicity is as high as it is in a sediment basin in a wetland, because much bigger capture, more concentration of from a bigger area, whereas a lot of these systems have maybe 100, 200 square metre catchment. So it's not as the concentration over time isn't as high, and we clean them more frequently.
Cool. I'm going to sort of.
Any other thoughts on that, Rob?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a bit of variability. You talk about, we always go on about the sediment issue, but of the 150 odd sites, sediment isn't always sediment. Like, there's quite a big variability in terms of the particle sizes and volumes and all the rest of it. And so, you know, you can imagine a scatter graph of catchment area to volume collected. It'll be really all over the place. One of the things that we have been able to do that Ralph flagged was when we're doing our monthly cleans and data collection, you can see the signage going up on a new building site, and we just flag straight away to the council, you know, this street, we're going to be expecting some issues, and there shouldn't be. You know, so let's be proactive about that. We shouldn't be using these kind of systems to collect, you know, bad practice off a site. So let's prevent that happening in the first place. And yeah, then the whole issue sort of cascades. But trees are helping quite a lot, I think, in terms of the, you know, shading and breakup of the sediment and all those kind of stuff. I think one of the questions was, are we monitoring for that kind of stuff? No, we're not. Again, it's just going to be anecdotal evidence in terms of how those kind of systems go. And a lot of this, I think, comes back to tying into these previous questions, is like, what's the cost and how much sediment and where's it going to go, and the rest of it is, a lot of this is going to ultimately relate back to the way a council or some other entity sets up the contract. So if you decide that you do want to understand the level of toxicity of the sediments, then we need to build that sort of stuff in. If we want to get, you know, particular type of weeding, we've got to build that in, and people will then price accordingly. But yeah, it's sort of interesting that our experience so far is that the really simple, you know, hand maintenance is sometimes, we think, actually more effective and quicker. But what we're doing when we get these contracts and trying to figure out what the price is, and ultimately coming back to everyone figuring out what does it cost to maintain this type of infrastructure as we continually scale it up and build more of it through a city, is we're trying to look for those specifics of things that we have to do, and then the efficiencies of how to get it done more quickly. And, you know, Ralph made a good point. It's sort of saying we want to understand what we're going to be maintaining from the first day. So we go out and check it out beforehand. And then we kind of, you know, it's called a learning curve really, but it's like the more you do it, the better you get at it. And so we're constantly looking for these little efficiencies. I think Jack did a report a couple of years ago about what's the cost to maintain systems, and literally travel time matters a lot. So we have clumps of systems in the one place, in one suburb. And Glenferrie is a really good example. We've got 91 tree pits to maintain, but it's over, maybe it's a kilometre or so. But it's one place really. You can go there and you're dedicated to deal with that maintenance at the one time. So it's all these little things that relate back to, you know, what sort of service are we trying to deliver? What sort of outcome are we looking for? Is it amenity, water quality, or the rest of it? And what's that costing you?
Yeah.
Brad, I've been asked to start wrapping things up. Maybe one or two more questions, and then I think we're going to have to put them, get Ralph to answer them in another format.
Yeah. Okay. Look,
okay. There's probably too many there to go through.
That's okay. I'll do the top one that's got the most thumbs up. So there's a question from Lisa around your stats on the kilograms of litter removed seem to have both organic and man-made litter. Have you got a sort of feel for what proportion is actually man-made and what proportion is actually organic?
Overwhelmingly, it's organic. We put most of it in the green waste where we can, where it's not too mixed up with the sediment, and we try to sort out a bit of the man-made stuff. But yeah, by far,
it's 95% plus organic. And that's, I think, you know, anyone that does that sort of litter analysis, and Lisa is very experienced at this stuff as well. So she's probably looking for some confirmation, some data on that. But yeah, and we will do our best to pull out a few, you know, things that can be recycled and the rest of it. But yeah, huge amount of organic.
Yeah, look, I'll pull the pin, Tracy. Obviously, a lot of people have enjoyed the Q&A. There's still 180 people still tuning in to hear these questions answered. So apologies if I didn't get to your question, but if you'd like to, feel free to reach out to Ralph directly and put forward your question to Ralph and Rob as well.
Yeah, and we'll send out the answers to these questions later on when the video comes out. Great. All right. Thank you, everyone. And thanks again, Ralph and Rob, for being on the panel today.
Thanks, everyone, for having us.
Guys.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.